Is it wrong to defend my husband after my ex-husband abandoned our children? Plus all updates. I, 38 female, have a 9-year-old son Max and 6-year-old daughter Olivia with my ex-husband Dan, 35 male. Max has severe autism and requires a lot of care. I remarried 3 years ago and my husband, Luke, is incredible. My ex, Dan, 35 male, has them 6 hours every week. This was on Tuesday, and as I was away for a funeral, Dan took the day off work to be with them in the morning and evening. X and his girlfriend, Sophie, picked them up as planned at 11 a.m. My husband took this time to play a round of golf with my brother. They finished the game at 4 p.m., and the golf is 30 minutes from our house. I got a call at 5 p.m. exactly from Sophie screaming at me about me abandoning my kids. I was confused, and eventually realized Luke wasn't home yet, so I told her where the spare key is so they could wait for Luke to come home inside. Unfortunately, Luke's car had gone kaboom on the motorway and he was in a complete coverage dead zone. He was able to call emergency services, but nothing else would connect. When the police arrived, the first thing he did was ask if someone could contact Dan to tell him what happened. Sophie was already on the phone to the police to report me and my husband for child abandonment. They said one of us should have been there and my ex doesn't feel safe inside our home, so they've left the kids inside our home and that the police needed to go and save our kids and arrest us. The police person speaking to them told them multiple times to turn around and that they were the ones who had abandoned them. This whole time I'm getting messages from Dan saying how this was unfair on him and Sophie and that I'm a terrible parent for leaving them with someone who doesn't give a shit about our kids. At this point, I didn't actually know what was going on. All I knew is that Luke wasn't home, but Dan had found the spare key. At no point did he tell me that they've left the kids alone. Luke got hold of me via the police and I arranged for a friend to go round there as soon as she could. But the police already had a unit there after the call with Sophie. After this, I've decided to try and get his 6 hours a week taken away. I've given him so much leeway over the years and this was my limit. Our son is dependent on an adult and our daughter is 6, and the only thing he would say to defend himself is, well, I kept up my side of the agreement by bringing them back after 6 hours. This has caused a whole other shitstorm, to the point where Sophie sent me messages that the police are now investigating. Dan hinted he is going to try and get the kids taken into care because of my husband abandoning them. I had multiple people ask me why I'm staying with someone who abandoned my children. His parents have threatened to try and gain custody of the children, saying the children need a stable family unit, and calling my husband abusive. I said fuck this, and put the whole story, with evidence, on my private Facebook page and people quickly understood. But now I'm being branded a drama queen and an asshole for publicly blasting the father of my children. Putting my husband above my kids. I don't understand how, he's more of a father to them than Dan is. I feel like I've taken crazy pills, AITA. Update. 4 days later. I immediately forgot the password to the account I posted this on, but I am the OP. I hope that's okay, mods. That happened a week ago, post was made a few days after it happened. The post I made on social media had kicked up quite the fuss, but most things have been sorted. For now. And my post is still up telling people what happened. My brother, hey Pete, was friends with my ex-husband before we ever got together. He also never really got involved in our relationship or separation. He's never really been involved in my life beyond being a good uncle. He's a nice guy, but we have never been that close. He's always been closer to my ex, and now with my husband. When he found out what happened, that completely changed and he put himself right in the middle of it all. My brother was always the beta in his friendship with Dan. I always suspected he was scared of him. Well, not anymore. He called Dan and ordered him to meet him at Dan's parents, who he knows quite well. Dan was advised that bringing Sophie to this meeting wouldn't end well for him. I don't know exactly what was said, but the result of their conversation is that Dan's parents are going no contact with him. I don't like them, they've never liked me, but I've never doubted they loved my kids and would protect them with their lives. Pete did tell me that Dan made it clear he wouldn't break up with Sophie under any circumstances, even if it meant he wouldn't be able to see his kids. Pete explained what happened to my ex-in-laws, that the version of events I posted was true, and went through the timeline, proof. Dan argued and bitched and moaned until his dad told him to leave. I think the fact that my brother, who is known for caring about beer, women and sports and nothing else, took this so seriously got the grandparents to wake up. I spoke to them, and although their apology was barely worth hearing, we came to an understanding. I'm not going to allow any visits, contact between Dan, Sophie and my children going forward. Our agreement was informal, no court's orders or anything. If he wants to see them, he will have to fight for it, which I know he won't. Those 6 hours a week are now going to be with his parents, on the condition that if they allow Dan to be around the kids, even once, they will be cut off from our lives. They were fine with this. Today came and they picked the kids up and spent the day with them. They called me after 5 hours and asked if they could bring them back an hour later than planned. They were having a lot of fun painting and the kids wanted to finish what they were doing. No problem, thanks for checking. I cannot stress enough how much I dislike them, but knowing my kids are with people who want to be with them is such a good feeling. Dan didn't even text me asking if he was going to have his scheduled time today. I spoke to a police officer yesterday about the messages sent to me by Sophie. I'm going to gloss over some details, for reasons, but they are moving forward with an investigation. There's a continued pattern of behavior, and it has been escalating. She's made some very specific threats and over the weekend sent me a message that contained information she would only know if she had followed me to where I was at the time. Luke has set up external cameras on our house, including making sure our cars are covered by cameras at all times. Our neighbors know what happened last week, so they're going to keep a lookout for her as well. I feel awful that I let this person be around my kids for almost a year. I let her be around them but didn't know her well enough to spot she was capable of behavior like this. I spoke to Olivia to ask what she thought of Sophie and she said she was grumpy and not fun, but nothing to indicate she hurt them or anything. This reaction to the whole situation is just unhinged. Luke has been a star through this. He's resisted the very strong urge to find Dan and beat him with a golf club. He's not worth replacing a driver, and made sure the kids know he loves spending time with them. Olivia calls him daddy anyway, but she knew she was abandoned last week and he's shown her that he's here for her. He's always loved Max and been amazing with him, but I know he's found it difficult to connect. He asked for advice and I told him just to try things he enjoys and see if Max engages. Well, Max spent 5 hours on Sunday with a golf putter in his hand hitting a ball to the putting machine thing Luke has in the garage, and apparently he's a natural. Luke now has it outside as Max became automatic in the garage and needed a bigger green. So, I'm now re-evaluating my life. Living with one golf obsessive was barely manageable, 2 maybe more than I can endure. I'm currently typing this looking at Olivia's painting of a birthday cake. Deranged threats aside, I'm happy with how things are right now. Update 2. 1 month later. Since my previous posts, everything has, mostly, been resolved. I didn't go into detail at the time, but a lot of what Sophie was sending me was accusing me of sexual infidelity, and had told a lot of people that I was someone who fucked other women's men. I thought she was accusing me of cheating on my ex with my now husband, but we will come back to this in a bit. She directed people to message me from public posts on her Facebook. One person turned up at my door to shout abuse at me. Between this and other stuff she did, I reported her to the police and they opened a case of harassment. I spoke to a lovely officer who took all the evidence I had and a week later she was arrested and interviewed. Her phone, computer were seized and she was released with bail conditions to not contact me directly or indirectly. I was told there was enough evidence to support a prosecution, but at that stage I just wanted to move on and be done with it. Dragging it through court for God knows how long seemed such a daunting and horrible future, so the police didn't move forward with prosecution and filed it with no further action, meaning the bail conditions would no longer apply the moment it was filed. I was told this would happen after a review from somebody that wasn't the officer dealing with it, which would be between 1 to 7 days, and I would be told when that was completed. I'm not 100% sure on the specifics, legalities of this paragraph, it's just how it was explained to me. I wasn't involved in any of it directly. This was communicated to her, and being the bright spark she is, she immediately messaged my brother something along the lines of his sister being a whore and a waste of police time. The bail conditions were still in place. He reported this to the police, not knowing I wasn't going forward with the whole case. Turns out that where I live, breach of bail conditions is a crime against the government, not the person they were in place to protect. I have no knowledge of what's going on with that, but I am led to believe she is in a bit of legal trouble. After she was interviewed, I was informed of what was said about all of this to the police, bringing everything full circle to the original incident that led to all this. Turns out Sophie and my ex were in a relationship for almost 2 years while we were still married, with it ending around the time my 6-year-old daughter was born, and then reconnected in the last year or so. I had no clue this happened. I'm actually weirdly impressed he hid it so well. Sophie was under the impression we split up a year into their relationship, and didn't know we had a son while they were together. When they reconnected, he told her we had 2 kids, which she wasn't happy about but forgave him. Thing is, my ex told her that my daughter is 8, she is 6. He was covering up lying to her all those years ago about separating from me. I guess this was easier than telling her that not only were we together for the 2nd year of their relationship, but we had a child in that time. I don't know what his long-term plan for this lie was. The day it all exploded, Olivia had corrected her about her age, and she realized that I had been having sex with her man while they were together all those years ago. My then husband. She thinks the moment he told her we had split up, she went from being the other woman to the legitimate partner. I'll go to my grave not understanding that logic. Anyway, she hit the roof and refused to be around his love child anymore, which led to the whole issue at my house in the first post. Luckily, she didn't say any of this in front of Olivia. Dan is still with her. They can have each other. He's made it clear he has no interest in seeing either his legitimate child or his love child, which is fine. His parents have been incredible this entire time, helping with childcare to the point I have been able to pick up more hours at work. We've gotten along much better since they've accepted that maybe all the bad things they heard about me weren't true. Still some bad blood there, but it's a much improved relationship, which is great for the kids because they love spending time with them both. The absolute worst part of all of this is that Max, Luke, my brother Pete, my ex Phil and Pete's BAL are now in a weird golfing crew. Max still only putts when they reach the hole, but he enjoys watching the others play the full game. Golf isn't played in the winter, is it? This ends soon, right? I'm going to hear conversations about anything else by the end of November, surely? Final update. 4 months later. This is an essay that no one asked for or will likely read. I don't care. I'm in a good place. I'm happy. I want to talk about it. Deal with it. Since my last post, child services were involved, and investigation was done. Legally, parental responsibility is solely mine. My ex didn't put up a fight. My solicitor and the child services people did a lot of the heavy lifting and carried me through it all. They're saints. I don't understand most of that stuff, but they held my hand throughout. Ever since everything exploded, my ex-in-laws have been amazing. If you'd have told me a year ago that I would cherish those 2 people, I'd have assumed you were on drugs. Or I was on drugs. Drugs would definitely be involved. They're called Joanne and William. Makes it easier to say nice things about them if they have names. I was given an opportunity at work to step into a more senior role, but it required a bigger time commitment than was possible given Max's needs and the kids going to 2 different schools. William owns a small business and had been planning on semi-retiring in 2026. He said he couldn't think of a better reason to bring that forward a few years than spending more time with his grandkids. He told me to accept the new role and we can figure everything out afterward. Which made me cry like a baby. Since the beginning of December, he has picked them up from their schools 3 times a week and has them until 7 p.m. He does all sorts with them. He took them to the aquarium because Max kept reading a book about fish. One day Olivia helped him do some things on his car while Max organized his tools. Another day he built a blanket fort for Livy and a pillow throne for Max and fought the sofa demon. Every day he has them, I'm told about something fun they did together when they get home. It's never been, we just sat around, it was boring, or we watched TV. He finds a way of engaging with them both, in different ways, at the same time. I'll be honest. That's something I struggle with a lot of the time. I never got the impression from my ex-husband that he was the greatest dad to him when he was growing up, but he's an unbelievable grandfather. They love their time with him. Christmas was the biggest turning point though. Despite them being so amazing and stepping up with the kids, there was still an underlying bitterness in both directions. They didn't treat me well while I was married to my ex. Nothing abusive, just generally rude and inconsiderate. Snippy and judgmental comments. They never made any effort to hide the fact that they didn't like me. I always assumed it was because of some drama at the beginning of mine and my ex's relationship that they couldn't get past. Christmas was me and my husband, the kids, William and Joanne, my brother, his fiancé and stepson, and my current in-laws, Pauline and Mike. We were planning out Christmas Day logistics between houses. Who would be eating where at what times, when Olivia said, "Can everyone come to our house? Daddy can cook for everyone." So that became the plan. While exchanging presents, the four in-laws gave me and Luke an envelope. It has 2 vouchers inside. The first one was for honeymoon, redeemable by Mummy and Daddy only. The second was a grandparent adventure week, redeemable by grandchildren only. They are to be used at the same time. Me and Luke weren't able to take a honeymoon when we got married, so the 4 of them are sending us on one. While we are away on that trip, the 4 of them will be taking my 2, and 2 of their cousins of similar ages. 1 from each side conveniently, away to an adventure and family resort not too far away from us. Center Parks. For those of you in the UK, I was 4 wines in at this point, so between the incredibly generous gift and William and Joanne calling Luke Daddy, I was a complete wreck. Olivia has always called Luke Daddy, but they always called him Luke to her when talking about him. It wasn't until I saw that voucher that I realized at some point, they'd switched over to calling him Daddy to the kids without me even noticing. A few wines later, I asked Joe why things couldn't be like this before. Why did they never like me? The moment Max was diagnosed, you decided that only you were capable of keeping him safe, and that continued when Olivia came along. Do you know how heartbreaking it is to not be trusted to look after your own grandchildren? That stung to hear. She wasn't wrong. Not saying it absolves them of how they treated me, but I had hurt them, even if I didn't mean to. I always told myself I trusted them with the kids, but looking back I was just telling myself a version of events that let me wrap them both, but specifically Max, in cotton wool. I would check up all the time. I would come pick them up early. I would make sure they checked every activity with me beforehand. To me, leaving them with them at all was me trusting them, but that clearly wasn't the reality. More tears followed, then apologies and hugs. It was very cathartic. I really enjoy her company now. We've even gone for lunch, just the 2 of us, a few times recently. Me 12 months ago would like to see me of today take a drug test for typing that last sentence. Oh, and my brother put his weight on our glass coffee table when getting up off the floor. It smashed and he required an ambulance. He was the only sober one, for a change, but couldn't drive as his hands were very red and very wet. Now my daughter knows that shouting, "Stupid fucking cunting table," at the top of your lungs is not allowed in our house, even if an adult does it first. Our honeymoon to Italy is booked for August. Grandparent Adventure Week is booked. The 2 granddads are determined to kill each other by turning every activity into a competition. Hearing 2 60-plus-year-old men debate who has the better physique for archery was one of the more surreal moments of my life. Prior to them contacting each other to arrange all of this, they never really interacted much beyond events involving the kids. Now they've got a group chat and make plans, just the 4 of them? There's talk of a cruise later in the year. Seeing my old in-laws and my new in-laws become friends is fucking weird, and it will never not be fucking weird. I did make a joke to my husband about how this is heading towards them swinging together, and he immediately walked out of the room in silence. For a moment I'd forgotten that half of that delightful foursome are his parents. Now onto the less fun stuff. My ex-husband Dan and his girlfriend Sophie. Sometime between Christmas and New Year, neighbors called police to Sophie's home and she was arrested. There was ongoing domestic abuse, and that final incident resulted in him being seriously hurt. I don't know specifically what injuries he had, only that she fucked him up really bad. She has been charged with GBH, grievous bodily harm, more than one I think, coercive control and non-fatal strangulation, and is being held on remand until whenever the trial is. This was all told to me by my brother, who still has mutual friends with him. I never had any indication this was going on, but then again, why would I? After this, Joe and William told me they were going to reach out to him. They're on the same page as me that the best thing for the kids going forward is for him to not be in their lives, but he's still their son and they want to be there for him. They didn't need my permission, but I appreciated the heads up. He has moved to another part of the country, being supported by a charity and making a fresh start. He asked them about the kids, but they told him that he needed to focus on himself before he could focus on his children. I received a letter from a solicitor earlier this month asking me to contact them. I asked my solicitor to find out what it was about. It was her solicitors, and they wanted me to consent to child services, providing them with any reports involving my ex and my kids. Am I correct in assuming you want me to politely tell them you don't wish to engage with this matter? I'd prefer you be impolite. I am struggling balancing my empathy for the awful situation he was clearly in with my rage for his disregard for our children. I don't know how I will ever be at a point where I trust him to be in the same room with them, let alone on his own. Even beyond the incident from my original post, there is just too much history there. I hope he gets the help he needs. I hope he lives a happy life. I really hope it's a long way away from my kids. I'm not saying never, but I see him having any future contact with them as highly unlikely at best. Yeah, that's all going on for someone I once thought was the love of my life. While I'm the happiest I've ever been. To end on a happy note, the weird golfing crew starts back up in 1.5 weeks. Golf is the worst, I hear you scream, it is never associated with happiness. What could possibly make anything related to golf a happy note to end on? When I was 13, I broke my arm riding my bike and couldn't compete in or train gymnastics for 5 months. My brother thought this was the funniest thing to ever happen to anybody in the world, ever. He asked me every Wednesday why I wasn't at gymnastics training, laughing to himself. My brother still can't play golf because of the injuries to his hands from Christmas Day. Karma's a bitch, Peter. Enjoy carrying my husband's clubs. Edit. Firstly, I've always had sole custody. He had 6 hours visitation because it was a written agreement stemming from our divorce, but it wasn't court enforced or anything. Child services were aware of it, but at no point did we go to family court over custody and visitation. I thought it was binding, but I was told after about 3 minutes into my first meeting with my solicitor that it wasn't worth the paper it was written on and he could challenge for a formal arrangement with more access. Which I knew he wouldn't do. And then later says she got sole custody of her kids. No, I didn't. What I wrote in my post is actually incorrect though. As I said, I'm not an expert on this. I put that I had been given sole parental responsibility, but that's not accurate according to my husband. There's an order in place preventing ex from making contact or being able to make decisions about them, but he still has legal parental responsibility. I got confused as that's a nuclear option for all this. Ex didn't fight the change, he didn't respond to a single communication about it from my solicitors, his parents, or the court stop. What do you guys think? Let's discuss in the comments. Follow for more stories.